Hi everyone, we're back with another episode of Chatterbox.
Yes.
And
Wish we were.
despite the topics, we're very happy to be here.
Yes.
But now we're going to get serious.
Yeah. So it is June something of 2020.
7th, I think.
Yeah, well, what is time?
Yeah.
So Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I mean, in case you're seeing this out of time, not immediately after we recorded it, the past couple of weeks, week, 10 days, 2 weeks, something, have been overwhelmed by the murder of George Floyd and the U.S. and international responses to that brutal event.
And let's be clear, this is not just about George Floyd. This is a boiling point. There have been countless deaths all over the world, especially in America and its history of slavery, of the murder of black men and women who were doing nothing but existing.
I was watching some old Oprah things, and there was an episode where they were talking to a guy whose father had been killed, and then it came out that he had been murdered and dismembered and then burned for being a black man. Just some guy, no particular reason, no traffic stop, no nothing. So it's important to remember that when we keep talking about George Floyd, who absolutely deserves remembering. That's not what I mean to say. But there are hundreds and thousands and tens and thousands of people who have been brutally murdered, whose names we don't know, much less have the capacity to remember.
And so we're going to be covering two and a half issues. None of them are about Black Lives Matter directly, because I think, we're going to link in the description things about Black Lives Matter from black folk directly to the website, that kind of thing. And obviously there are people who are better qualified to talk about that, who are
black.
Yeah.
We have no place talking about what should happen in response to black murders. We need to listen to the black community and do what they ask of us.
Yeah.
And we are doing that, and we will continue to do that, and we are asking you to do that. But what we want to talk about is the kinds of experiences that we have had that make us potentially more sensitive than some other people to these issues.
And so for us, we want to encourage, we're going to try and talk about these as a way to encourage solidarity in more than just name and a nice fist gif. And also about education, because one of the things that has been popping up lately is people talking to their kids about race and police and educating their kids about that.
Yeah, there's no question that there's at least two sorts of education issues. One of them is the formal state curriculum or private school curricula. And the other one is a more kind of popular culture, everyday kind of education, the kind of education parents do with children and media do with audiences and all those kinds of things.
And what we're going to talk about is that just talking about the police is not enough because of how absent that education is.
Absolutely.
In everything.
Yeah. Okay, start.
Right, so first things first, on the rails. No. First things first, you have heard us talk about being Armenian and being not exactly white. So, I'm currently wearing, for example, a Taraz hat. I think you have to specify that it's specifically the hat, because I think Taraz is all of the clothing. I'm not sure. But it is, this kind of hat is worn throughout North Africa all the way up to Eurasia. And in Armenia, it's considered a traditional Armenian hat. And it isn't associated with
Islam.
But if I go out in public with my beard and my skin and this hat, I get a very different response.
Than you used to without the hat.
Than I used to without the hat, and then I used to without the
beard.
The beard, yeah. My body hair, before that, people would assume that I was like Greek.
Yeah, before you transitioned.
Well, no, before I transitioned, maybe I would be like, yeah. And Mom has also had a kind of transracial experience in the non-loaded form.
Yeah, so I have been taken for Greek, Italian, Spanish, all those kinds of things. I've been routinely in the U.S. taken for being Latina. I think Latinx people see me, often speak to me in Spanish, for instance. All kinds of things. And you know what? That's great. I have no trouble with that, except that I don't speak Spanish. So other than that, I have no trouble.
You understand it, and you respond in English, and they just are like, bad one.
Yeah. So and when I was younger, and my hair was dark, it was dark and long and frizzy, and so it had a very... before I understood how to take care of curly hair, it had a very
because that's not in the education system.
My mother didn't know how to tell me to take care of my hair, right? I mean, that's another episode. But I looked very Middle Eastern, I would say, and so in the U.S. I got taken for all these other communities, primarily Latina, but when I traveled to Europe, which I did a lot when I was young, I used to say I changed race over the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and every experience in airports in Europe was that I was perceived as a non-white threat, and particularly as a Middle Eastern threat. And I would be singled out, or I would
we would always be randomly searched.
Yeah. And you remember that from when you were a kid. You've talked about it on other occasions. I have loads of stories like that, but I was constantly being checked, surveilled, isolated, pulled out, all kinds of stuff, and all kinds of questions.
Yeah, I get people... I get a lot of... white women who are uncomfortable around me, and I get a lot of people who are interested in my heritage and my culture and in this kind of weird fetishy way. I think all of this is to say that we are othered, and unfortunately many othered groups want to throw others under the bus.
Yep.
As a way to get themselves higher up on the food chain, I guess. I mean, the example that I remember first hearing about and being furious about, Mom didn't tell it to me at the time. I guess I was a bit young and preoccupied.
I don't know what story is coming.
Which was the special registration.
Oh, yeah. You were a baby. I mean, special registration was 1991 or 92 or something. And you were born in 1990, so yeah.
I thought you said it was Bush 2.
Yeah, isn't that when that is?
No, Bush 2 is when I was in middle school and elementary.
Okay, I'm remembering badly.
So
you're right.
Yeah, because Clinton.
Yeah, you're right.
So... Mom will tell you about special registration and how well the Armenians handled that.
So, special registration was a policy that Bush put in place at the beginning of the Iraq War, or immediately after 9/11. I can't remember. But anyway, it was about having all people of Middle East heritage. I think it was all people of Arab heritage. I'm not exactly sure because a long time ago I can't really remember.
I think it probably started as Middle Eastern and changed to Arab because of...
So when they did that, I mean, the point very obviously was to keep track of potential terrorists.
You know, the
Right?
darkies.
Yeah. And so they called Armenians. And, you know, Armenians had two opportunities at that moment. One was to say, you don't understand anything about the Middle East, as evidenced by the fact that you don't know who we are, right? And that we pride ourselves on being the first Christian nation, blah, blah, blah. And so clearly you need to go home and do your homework and stop this special registration fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? Or they could do what they did, which was to say, go ahead, register everybody else, but not us.
We're Christian.
We're not the right people. You don't want us. You're not worried about us. Right? And it was a moment that was not in the least surprising, but profoundly disappointing if you were any kind of leftist Armenian.
Yeah, and so you know that's one of those things. I mean, it's not only the Armenian community. There's a number of white aspirational communities. Hassan Minhaj talks about it, and we'll link his video.
Yeah.
About people who are other ethnicities that are not white, basically not banding together to address these issues. And in the case of Black Lives Matter, it has a deadly effect, you know.
Literally.
And so if ever there was a time to band, it would have been yesterday, but now will do.
Yeah.
And you know, there has been, from the Californian Armenian community, a little bit of...
Yeah, for the first time recently, Asparez, which is one of the California Armenian language newspapers, it's bilingual actually, in the English language section, published something about standing with Black Lives Matter.
And why it's important as survivors of genocide.
Yeah. Which is exactly the position you would hope they would take.
Yes.
Unfortunately, as I understand it, the Armenian language version was not quite as clear and well stated, and used language that might not
have been ideal.
Be what you would hope for.
Yes.
And none of the other Armenian papers, as far as I know, have done anything similar. I don't know what's happening on TV, on the Armenian TV stations. But this is a first. This is a first for the Armenian community.
Yeah. And that's depressing. But also hopeful. But depressing.
But hopeful. But depressing.
Yes. And it's not just the Armenians, you know. Throughout, there's been a rash of, like, Black Lives Matter movements in South America, Australia, there was some in Lebanon, there's ones going on here in England and throughout other spots in Europe, because, you know, that racism exists in different forms. I mean, the racism against any different race exists, but specifically to black folk exists Windrush, the kafala system, the Aborigine mob black kind of thing that goes on in Australia.
Huh?
So in Australia, the Aborigine are considered black.
Okay.
And they are basically black and indigenous in treatment. And so they get constantly, like, killed in custody.
Yeah, no, I know all of that, but what did you mean by mob?
Oh, that's another, that's a MOB is a abbreviation, which I think has to do with Aborigine regions.
Oh, okay. I know nothing about that, so.
Yes. I don't think they actually call it mob, like the way that people don't actually say POC, except for me.
Yeah. That means person of color, for those of you who didn't know. Okay. So, do we have more to say about the solidarity
No,
issue?
just that. We will also be linking a quote from.
Okay, so we wanted to close this section with a reminder of Reverend Niemöller's very eerie. I guess it's a speech. It's either a poem or a speech. But he says he was a pastor in Germany during World War II, and he says they came for the gypsies, and I wasn't a gypsy, so I didn't say anything. And they came for the gays, and I wasn't gay, so I didn't say anything. And they came for the Jews, and I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't say anything. And he has a long list. And then he says, and when they came for me, there was no one to speak.
So, even if you weren't going to do this out of human decency and out of the fact that you have compassion for your friends and family, because let's face it, there is no community that couldn't also, like, there's no isolation. There's
no community who's safe from this kind of treatment.
Yes, and it's not like there isn't such thing as black Armenians,
right?
Or black trans folk, or
right,
any kind. Like, you can be anything and anything.
Yeah,
including black.
Yes.
So if you can't care about the black people in your community, or the people who you love, or just general human kindness, then at least care because you want to stand together with somebody who will be there for you when you're vulnerable. Right.
Yeah, it's a good investment.
Yes.
Okay.
Which shouldn't be an argument that's needed.
Right. So now we want to move on to the question of education.
Yes.
And what needs to be said at this moment.
Yes. So, a lot of people have been talking about teaching your kids about race and police, and why, for example, if you are dealing with like a black person who's nonviolent, you wouldn't call the cops necessarily in this era. For people who aren't black.
Yeah, I mean, if that store clerk had not called the cops, George Floyd would be here.
Yeah, for example. But I think that we need to do more than that. I was one of two people who wasn't white in my...
in one of your schools.
In one of my schools. I mean, in one of my schools, I was like the only white kid. Mm-hmm. So it was very strange to be on those different borders.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was me, and there was this South American girl who was adopted. And we never had any classes together. And I was in history class, and we were given an assignment. And the assignment was something along the lines of, like, we're going to give you a random person who was involved in the foundation and discovery of America, in quotes. You will be dressing up and acting as them and relaying the story. It's like a first-person thing. It'll help with the learning and whatever. I was given...
Francisco Coronado.
Who is a...
killer.
A killer, probably a rapist.
I would imagine.
Genocidal.
He was a conquistador.
He washed the soil with blood of the indigenous communities. And, obviously they weren't expecting that history. They wouldn't have given that to an elementary school kid. Right. And my mom, as a Armenian and survivor, descendant of survivors of genocide, you remember people who actually survived the genocide.
Yeah.
Right. And my dad is somebody who believes in the absolute truth and the absolute truth of history, and believes that if you're going to do that kind of thing, you don't lie about it. Right. Because that he believes in knowledge and learning. And you can't do that with...
But he's also principled about these things.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, he believes that you really need to say what happened.
Yeah.
And you need to say the fullness of what happened. But also, he would never cover for somebody like that.
No, yeah. But I think those go hand in hand.
Yeah, maybe.
Right?
Maybe.
So they got me to tears. Why do I have to be such a bad man? But I got to dress up with a mustache and amazing boots.
And cool gloves.
Cool gloves. Oh god, I love gloves. But yeah, so, at least I looked good while being a killer.
And then you went to school.
And then I went to school, and everybody else told how great their people were because they learned from those sources. And I, the only person in my class who wasn't white, got up and told the story of a killer that I was forced to wear the skin of. I painted the picture of a brutal villain and left the class silent. And none of them had to do that. None of them had to sit with that. None of them had to learn that. I did. That is something that we need to remedy.
Absolutely. I mean, the assignment is inappropriate. The papering over of the violence of the establishment of the U.S. is inappropriate. The erasure of the indigenous communities in the U.S. is violently inappropriate. I mean, there's so many things that go on in education, and the way colonialism is treated here is very similar.
Yeah.
There's no.
We live in a state that was part of the slave trade triangle.
Right. I mean, Liverpool became significant as a city because of the slave trade.
And it's radically left-wing now. And still, that's not in the curriculum or in the conversation.
There's a slavery museum. There's lots of different kind of nods to that history. But the curriculum is not one of the places where that's happening.
And the slavery museum is in the museum... in the Maritime Museum. So it's a museum within a museum. And it's something that you only really find out about through some of the other arts groups, especially the ones that represent...
No, I think it's pretty well known. I think people know that the Slavery Museum is there.
Yeah, but nobody talks about it.
Well, maybe. I mean, in the communities I am in, people talk about it. It's a very...
But what communities are you in?
Arts, generally speaking.
That's what I said.
Yeah, but not... I mean, it's not like ethnic arts or anything. No, I mean, the festival is, but not... I don't only talk to people from the Arab Arts Festival. Come on.
Anyway, sorry about that.
That was a little diversion.
But, it's that way across the world. I had a friend who was Japanese who didn't know anything about the Korean colonization. I had a friend who was Turkish who only found out about the Armenian stuff through, doing some research in their family history and found out that they had Armenian in them that nobody told them about.
There's a host of novels and various kinds of works coming out in this generation in Turkey. And one, between us, right? People discovering that they have Armenian ancestry and they don't know anything about it. And all of that was silenced. And so now they're retrieving it, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, and this isn't... And to bring this back to blackness,
just like in Japan, they didn't teach Korean colonization, and just like in Turkey, they don't teach the Armenian genocide. In the U.S., the way that slavery and the aftermaths of slavery and the Reconstruction, history of Reconstruction and the history of Jim Crow is, if it's taught, it's a little mention, and there's something about 40 acres and a mule, and then it's on we go.
Here's how it's taught. So there was slavery. Slavery was bad. George Lincoln?
Abraham
What?
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. George Abraham Lincoln. Our founding father and secret gay president. Do you not know that rumor about Abraham Lincoln?
I have heard that, yeah.
Anyway, so Abraham Lincoln fixed it all. It was wonderful. He cured slavery, and everything was fine ever since.
Do you know that story about Dad and the citizenship test?
Oh.
So Leo was preparing for a citizenship test in the U.S. and
you have to tell them about the time you got stopped at the voting.
Oh yeah. So the lawyer who was helping Leo prep said, and what was the cause of the Civil War? And Leo said, the secession of the South. And the lawyer said, no, it's to end slavery. And Leo said, listen, you're lucky I didn't say it was a war between two competing modes of production, the agriculture and the industrial. Slavery was a tag-on in the history of the Civil War. At best, it was one expression of that clash of economic systems, right? Yeah. But we're taught that slavery was the point of the Civil War and that it was resolved by the Civil War and that there's nothing more to say about it than that. We talk about Reconstruction as if it was a successful period, that blacks could get 40 acres and a mule and it was fine, and all of that stuff is literally whitewashed.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Jim Crow and all of that. Nobody learns about desegregation in classrooms, right? You have to
that would require desegregation to happen.
No, but I mean, Brown versus Board of Education and all those things, the genuine desegregation decisions and activism and that stuff,
Yeah.
So there's a long way to go in terms of both institutional and personal educational activities.
As well as international. We briefly mentioned it earlier, but we also need to have news that covers what's going on, right? Because at the moment, not anymore, but there was a move by Trump to get black people to be anti-immigration by saying that other black people that came from Africa or other areas couldn't understand the American descendants of slaves.
Yeah.
And so there was a kind of push to get the American descendants of slavery to become anti-immigration.
Yeah, he's vile. It doesn't.
Yeah, that lack of international education and the lack of understanding that slavery still exists today, including for black people now, is a problem.
Well, yeah. The invisibility of modern slavery, despite its enormous presence across the globe, it's a topic for another episode. It's terrifying in its own right. But
worldwide.
We want to end by asking you to do the kinds of things that we are trying to do, which is to learn as much as we can about what's happening in our home countries and around the rest of the world, to listen to the Black Lives Matter people and people working in organizations against police violence.
And if you're a cop,
just wait a second. Trying to do what those organizations are telling us they need us to do. We will put the link to the page on the Black Lives Matter website where they list what they're hoping we will do. And that we would like to ask everyone to not stop with sympathy.
Yeah.
And to make as significant donations as you can, but not to stop there.
Yeah.
And to do whatever else you can to support this struggle and how and whatever form it takes as it's moving forward.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a moment where you either step up or you have your knee on somebody's neck.
Yeah. I would add like a few small things. One is, if you're a cop and you want to be a good cop, a good cop strikes or calls in sick or stands with the protesters, even if it risks you getting fired. Because right now, I mean, it's not even a rotten barrel, it's cider vinegar.
Yeah, I think we did an earlier version of this, and I said something that I genuinely believe, which is if you're a cop, this is one of those moments where you're making a decision about who you are as a human being. Either you do what is right and refuse to police the protesters and refuse to kill and maim and destroy the lives of black and white, but black people on the streets.
Yeah. I mean,
or you are going to be remembered as part of the problem.
Yeah, you're going to be remembered as somebody who launched chemical weapons into civilians.
Absolutely. If you lose your job, you'll get another job. If you don't step up at this moment, people will remember you as the guy who launched tear gas grenades at peaceful bystanders. You know, what's happening, what police forces are doing around the country and around the globe is indescribably violent. It's unbelievably violent. The number of young black people who have been killed in the protesting has been breathtaking. It has got to stop. And if you are a cop or a member of any of the armed forces in the U.S., you need to step up and refuse to be party to this. It's unconstitutional. What's happening is not right. It's not legal. If you don't stand up for what it means to be an American, then you and all the rest of us are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I think also it's important now to remember the words of Marsha P. Johnson, one of the women...
One of the original Stonewall protesters.
Yes. A black trans woman. She said, "No one is free until everyone is free." And that's right, you know. Right now, we didn't stand when... We didn't all band together when it happened in Ferguson. We didn't all band together when people were being rounded up and put into concentration camps, ICE. The special registration, we didn't band together, you know, with the Middle Eastern folk. The ghettoization of black and indigenous communities, we didn't do anything about, you know. The criminalization of the poor, the removal of women's rights, the etc., etc.
Violence against trans people.
Violence.
The routine death of trans people.
Imagine being black and trans.
Yeah. And a sex worker.
Yeah. You know.
Because no one else will hire you to do anything else.
Yeah, when anybody found out I was trans, I didn't get a job. I can't imagine what it would be like. And there's, like, different time. But yeah, you know, we didn't stand together united on these moments of human rights violations. And we're here now. We're here now in a fascist world of Modi, of Trump, of Erdogan.
Bolsonaro, Putin, Duterte.
Xi Jinping.
Yep. I mean, the world is full of actively fascist
Assad.
And Trump and Assad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could keep going.
Yeah.
The number of genuinely actively fascist leaders in the world at the moment is terrifying. If we don't stand up now, when lives are being lost for passing a counterfeit bill.
Who? Yeah, how would you even know if it was?
First of all, okay, let's not go there. There's a whole other conversation. But, for lying in your bed, for selling cigarettes on the street, for, all of the black people who have been killed for nothing. And in the context of a world that's being taken over by fascism, if we don't stand up now, when are we going to earn our humanity?
Yeah.
We're going to put lots of information in the description box, and we'll continue to put information. If we fill the description box, it'll be in highlighted comments. We'll give you as many tools as we can. We'll also read the comments and try to be active in the conversations.
Please share this.
Please share this widely. As many people as you think might be interested in having this conversation.
Yeah. We'll be also linking to like Amber Ruffian stories, and I would like to encourage people, especially black people, to be telling their stories. And if you know people who are telling those stories, link them in the comments. We will.
Yep.
We're grateful.
Yeah. Don't be silent.
Yeah, and if you can't go to the protests, that's okay. Anything you can do is enough.
Just do whatever you can.
Yeah.
Do something. Thanks.